Welcome to the Consulting Leaders Podcast, where we talk about the business of consulting. Whether you're looking to grow your practice or learn from the stories of leaders in consulting, you're in the right place. I'm your host, Guillaume Jouvencel, ex-PwC and co-founder of GHA Marketing. Join me as I interview the best consultants in their niche. Let's get on with the show. Sina, welcome to Consulting Leaders. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Well, thank you for having me, Guillaume. I look forward to it.
Let's just jump straight into it then. What got you into B2B coaching, Christina?
Well, as you know, I started my career as a marriage and family therapist back in the mid-90s, specifically working with executives and family-owned businesses and business partnerships. And after seeing a lot of dysfunction in those relationships, which is how, why I was working with my clients, because things had really just fallen apart in the business and in the relationship. Part of me just said, this can all be preventable. And so instead of working with people who, had gone down, an unfortunate path, I thought that executive coaching would be a good way to help people build a partnership or build a business that they would love, that was started right, that was built with a healthy infrastructure. And so that's why I made the transition to executive coaching and business coaching.
That does make a lot of sense. So how can you walk us through what problem you're solving now and for whom specifically?
What problem I'm solving? Well, the problem that I'm solving right now for, we'll say, businesses, and that's basically fast growth businesses, because there's urgency there and there's desire and motivation to grow sustainably. By that, I mean building a business that is built to last, and it's not hanging on by its fingernails, and without strategy and just hope. And so I really, my sweet spot is lower mid-market companies that are growing, and they could be in a variety of industries. So we're fairly industry agnostic. There are some industries that we prefer to work with, just because I have experience in those industries and they're interesting. So that would be medical devices, biotech, professional service companies, actually, consulting companies, attorneys, architecture firms, accounting firms, for example, are some of our clients that are in the professional services space. Construction, advanced manufacturing. I really do love working with family-owned businesses, as well as women-owned businesses. So pretty industry agnostic. And the problem we help them solve is so that they can scale and grow by growing from the inside out, basically making sure that we're not building a house on sand, which often business owners do. And they make the mistake of growing too quickly without having the infrastructure, meaning the people in place, whether that's at the top and all the way down. And oftentimes they don't either have the right people in the right seats. They might not even know what seats they need to grow. So we give them tools to be able to project, based on their profitability goals and revenue goals and growth goals. How do we backwards plan and make sure that we have the right infrastructure? And that also means people, because people are the ones that execute strategy. So we help them create a strategy that's owned by all. We like to say we're 100% of the people take 100% ownership 100% of the time. And by developing that and involving everybody, it's a very inclusive process of creating an executable strategy that people are really excited about. A lot of times you mention strategy and everybody's eyes roll in the back of their head, right? Because there's this gap between what the vision, the leadership has, and then the people that are executing that on a day-to-day basis. There's often a gap and a disconnect. So we make sure that we build it from the top down. We start bottom up. So we also work at the level of each individual leader who's responsible for executing, because people bring their human to work. So, how can we help grow people individually so that they can rise to the occasion, right? And be part of that, part of that team that makes all that happen.
So who typically makes the decision to get you on board? Like, who is it that you need to get into the room with? Because that's B2B coaches and consultants, that's the crux, right? We need to
Yep.
get in front of the right decision maker. So for you, who is that?
Founder or the CEO.
Right. Okay. And so this is because you're targeting lower mid-market companies. So what's, just so the audience and I have a good understanding, like what size of employees does that typically represent?
Yeah, you bet. I think a real good sweet spot would be size of number of employees, 50 to 100. Once companies and organizations are reaching that 100 mark, that's a tipping point for growth. And things could either go really well or really poorly. Once a company grows to that size. From a revenue standpoint, we're probably talking about companies that are at the bottom end. I'd say 2 million EBITDA or 5 million revenue. Those can be, obviously different numbers and needing to grow. That's the bottom end. I think more so companies bring us in when they're at about either they're getting close to that tipping point of 100 people or they want to grow. They have that kind of a growth goal and or revenue wise. Again, it's a whole other conversation on revenue versus profitability, but I think our goal is to help increase companies' value.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And that would depend on the industry, whether you want to target revenues for that or EBITDA. But overall, if you grow the EBITDA, it's usually a good thing to improve the value of a company.
Yeah, across the board. I mean, if you want to think about how we're comparing apples to apples, if you want to talk about a company that wants to grow, right? Whether that's to grow for purposes of what, so the owner can exit, so the employees can own, so that they can, they can be acquired by another company. I guess it all depends on the exit goal and how, what that exit goal looks like. But if we compare apples to apples in terms of a value of a company, EBITDA is probably the most consistent, definition.
Yeah, that does make a lot of sense. So what has worked for you, Christina, in terms of attracting those founders, CEOs of 50 to 100 employees companies who you feel you can help? The question I'm asking really here is, what has worked for you in terms of marketing and what can consultants learn from it?
Absolutely. I think I'll say what hasn't worked for me, because I spent many years in my business. I've been in business for a really long time. So in this business, 2009, and I had a business prior to that also, a service-based business that I sold. The biggest mistakes I made were expecting to create the solution in a vacuum in my cone of silence, right? And figuring I had the best solution ever, and now I have to find people and sell the solution, right? I have to convince them that they have a problem that I can solve. And that took a lot of time, a lot of wasted time, a lot of money, and a lot of wasted energy. The turning point in my consulting business was really when I recognized that I had to identify an existing problem. And I'm going to use an acronym that I don't own, that actually came to me from a mentor of mine, Angelique Ruers, but she coined a term, super problem. So a super problem, it's an acronym for a specific, urgent, pervasive, persistent, expensive, not my cost, but the expense to the company, expensive, and relevant, i.e., they can see the problem, right? When I can identify what's the super problem, my ideal client, which I also had to define. So it was about clarity, getting clarity on the client I could help the best, whether my experience, my desire, my expertise could solve, who was that for, and what was the problem in their language. So I had to get very, very, very narrow in order to be able to move forward in terms of marketing, right? So clarity, right? How we define our market and then define the problem we solve and for whom. Marketing is interesting. I think a lot of professional service providers and a lot of business owners make the mistake of, well, we have this thing called the internet, and I have this thing called a web page, right? And a website, and people are just going to come to my website and find me. So I think that was a big mistake that I made myself as well. So I feel like identifying, and this is kind of where we get into, you mentioned, that I use the Kolbe assessment. It's Kolbe. It's an assessment that identifies how we do things when we're striving, and it's instinctive. So recognizing what I did well when it comes to marketing and what I absolutely hate doing and won't and couldn't pull myself out of bed to do. I had to identify, what do I do best, what I love doing. And that was these anchor activities in speaking. So I love presenting at industry conferences to a room full of at least 50% of decision makers, right? That can bring me in if they have a problem that I can solve. So speaking is definitely one way. It just helps me deliver value right away. And I think that's important when it comes to marketing, which is, you have to be able to demonstrate how you've got to make a connection and deliver value immediately, right? Because there's a lot of noise and a lot of competition. So you have to find a way, how do you connect and communicate the value that you can deliver. So for me, it was speaking. For other people, not so much. A lot of people don't like public speaking. So and what didn't work was cold calling, which I hated anyway. Thank gosh. Right. But I think the other marketing piece that I'll offer is I really am interested in learning about what my potential clients are struggling with, because when I'm in that perspective of not trying to convince them that I can help them, I don't know, where I really have to be willing to come to the meeting with an open mind of, I don't know if I can help or not. I want to learn more about what you're struggling with. So let's co-create, let me be curious, see what you're struggling with. And maybe it's not something I can help with, but maybe I can help you by making a connection to somebody I think could help you. Right. So really approaching that conversation with an open mind and not attached to a sale or an outcome. And then building a relationship, investing in the relationship equity, if you will. For being a hip pocket resource, maybe somebody that you don't need our services right now, but someday you might. And here are some signs that if you are experiencing X, Y, and Z, right, then you'll have somebody that you've already talked to that might be a known entity that you already have some trust in, so that you can call me. So my sales process is actually, unfortunately, in some ways rather long, because I really start with building that relationship. And it's no pressure. It's really genuinely being curious, adding value, literally no strings attached. And then when and if, I want to continue to be top of mind. So if they have a problem I can solve, then they can call, right? So that's a long story in terms of marketing, in terms of the lessons I've learned the hard way.
But this is great, Christina. Thanks a lot for sharing this. So there are, many golden nuggets in there. There are a few that I want to double down on because it is so important. And we see each and every day B2B coaches and consultants not being crystal clear on those few key things. I think it's really important to double down on them. Being extremely clear on who you service, the ICP, right? I like the super analogy. And even before that, and clearly you know who you're helping, but like being crystal clear on who you're helping and not just business owners, right? Like specific industry, specific size, specific sales process, specific points or turning point in their business, and being clear on what you help them with is super important, because from all that comes the messaging, which is the very first thing you started with. Like, you're not going to get the attention of the right people who can pay you the right amount of money if you're not very specific in your messaging as well. It's so funny that you mentioned speaking, and that you don't like cold calling, that it didn't work, because yesterday I had a guest, Alicia Curry, who actually developed her whole business with cold calling. And so the whole point here is do what feels the best for you, but then do one thing very, very well. That's the second key learning that I want to double down on here. Talk to me about the website thing. The reason I'm asking this is I talk to many B2B coaches and consultants, and I'd say at least half of them is constantly redoing their website. It's like, oh yeah, I'm redoing my website. It's like, it's gonna come up, it's gonna be great. And the question I always ask is like, oh cool, like how many people visit your website each and every month right now? I don't know. I'm like, right. Is that the thing where you should put all your focus on right now? If you don't even know how many people come there, and probably not a lot, to be fair. Like, what was the thing that made you realize that you needed to focus on the things that's actually growing your business, not the things that will make it look prettier or like feel like it's good to have, but actually doesn't do anything for your business?
It's so funny you say that. I have two illustrations. One personally, and this was, I think when I had a website, gosh darn, probably when websites were a way certain kinds of businesses were getting business, like, but it certainly wasn't professional services. And I think, for me, and I see a lot of clients start that path, especially well, my website has to be this or that. And I just got off a prospecting call with a business owner. He's a service consulting business. There's also there's another component to it too, where there's tangible deliverable, but he decided not to proceed with business coaching because, and I had to laugh. I actually still haven't responded to the email yet, but he's like, what I need to do is I shouldn't spend time growing my business and defining my infrastructure, what purpose, what problem do we solve? Who's my ideal target market? How can we get a list and find out where they hang out, where I can be in front of these people? No, we're not doing that. What he decided to do with his investment was to hire a web designer, which web designers are wonderful, but they will absolutely take your money and then promise all kinds of things that don't have, like SEO. And I thought, okay, I still haven't responded to that. I'm not going to argue with somebody who's made a decision already, but that's a mistake. And in some ways it's a way to avoid learning about what you really do need to do. So I see a lot of business owners, and I'm going to include myself in this early on, which is I spent way too much time trying to figure out this website thing. That is not where my clients are coming from. Where are my clients really coming from? Who are my clients? When I looked into the data of who my clients were, what their demographics and psychographics were, what problem they told me I solved for them, because if you listen, they'll tell you what your business is. And if you're not clear about what your business is, they'll dictate it. We don't want that. But I really paid attention, and it wasn't what I thought it was. And how I did when I looked at the data, you got to make decisions on data. When I looked at the data, first of all, I didn't know who was coming from my website, so I couldn't have told you it was website, but it was relationships. It was referrals. It was when I was speaking, right, at an industry conference, or I was teaching in a breakout session. And I thought, well, because here's another example. I was applying to do keynotes and also doing breakout sessions at conferences. And I always thought it was the keynote. Well, it wasn't the keynote. because the keynote is a very different animal than a breakout session. A breakout session, I can roll my sleeves up and give people tools and teach them how to use them. And I can orchestrate conversations in the room where they could contribute to the solution, right? It was so much more valuable. So you have to look at the data, right? And then also be careful. You can go broke. Literally, you will go bankrupt if you focus on the website and the SEO and the cold calling and all that stuff. But and for some people, like the guest that you had yesterday, if it works for you, oh my gosh, keep doing it. But I know that doesn't work for me. So being honest with ourselves about where we're putting energy, attention, and time, and looking at the data and saying where are we getting results, and do I love doing that? Which is another question we need to be honest with ourselves about.
Amen to that. Another thing that you mentioned, Christina, that I want to get further thoughts on is very long sales cycles. I think
Mhm.
in B2B coaching and consulting, this is going to be this is going to be the case most of the time, right? You have potentially multiple stakeholders involved, and probably multiple decision makers,
Mhm.
financial, the ones that you're going to work with, the one
Mhm.
who's ultimately making the decision. So
Mhm.
by nature, our business is coming with long sales cycles, which is sometimes a bit frustrating, but this is the nature of the beast.
Yeah.
So how do you go from everything we just talked from, interactions in a breakout session, or an audience in a speaking engagement, or like people start getting aware of what you do and they also become problem aware, hopefully of the right problem, not I need to redo my website, but more how do I go from $2 to $4 million EBITDA? So how do you go from that to letter of engagement, SOW, we rock and roll? Can you walk us through the sales motion?
Absolutely. Well, I think, if you look at it like an upside down triangle, here's your funnel, right? So you have to cast a very wide net, but a net that you're fishing in the right ocean. Okay. If you want a certain kind of fish, you got to fish in the right ocean. So starting from that, we talked about, where are the clients that are my prospective clients? What problem do they have? How do I get in front of them, right? High proximity to my ideal clients. So identifying those opportunities. And then from there, demonstrating, adding value, giving value, not holding back and being afraid that, well, they're going to, if all I had to do was mention a handful of tools in a room and that was all I had, and I had to give it away for free, well, maybe I'm in the wrong business. So, right. But just kind of scratching the surface, right? Scratching an itch that they may have, demonstrating value, and then having a process. I'm big on process, right? So having a process of, what do I offer? We call it a call to action light and a call to action heavy. And even in a situation like a speaking engagement where you can't sell from the stage, which is 99.9% of them, there's a way to do a presentation where you can add examples, obviously not identified client examples of a problem you solved. Like, here is the problem they came, and you don't really talk too much about what you did, but here was the results, right? So speaking to those results, that's important to see that interaction with examples, right? And you might have a call to action light, which is, well, if you'd like a copy of the slides, or if you'd like a quick self-assessment, is what we use. Feel free to email me. Happy to send it. Send it afterwards. So having a process to follow up on those call to action lights. Call to action heavy, which might be, the reality is 1 to 3% of the people in the room, whether there's 10, 100, 1,000 people in the room, right, in your audience, 1 to 3% have the problem you can solve and are ready to buy right now. 1 to 3%, which is why you need to cast a very wide net in the right ocean first. But then we kind of go down the triangle, right? Now we're down tiers. So you let them know, like, if this is happening, and this is the call to action heavy, if you will, in the next, 30, 45, or 60 days, you are looking to accomplish X, right? Then feel free to reach out. Here's my contact information. Now that's, you can't push, pull, or drag, or shove somebody through a door, but letting them know right? That this is something I can solve, and making it easy for them to have a conversation. Whether you give me a business card, I don't even think people use those anymore, but like, somehow either get their contact information and follow up with an offer to just have a right fit conversation. It's still no pressure. It's still a let me listen a little bit to your goals and see if there would even be a right fit, and if it makes sense to have a longer conversation, right? To discover what your needs really are. But let's just keep it easy and doable, right? But being very, again, specific about if X is happening, like, and that's from their perspective. Like, you have a new competitor that's moved to town, and you're, the conversation we're having around in our leadership meeting is, oh crap, like, there, what are we going to do? Right. Are we going to lose, some of our clients to a competitor, or we have a couple of key people who have now been poached by the competition, right? So when these specific things are happening, that's when you call. So giving people that very specific, if this, then that, right? Connection. Don't ever assume people know what you're doing, what you do, not even how you do it, but just never assume. So you have to make things really crystal clear. And then having a process to follow up immediately afterwards with whatever you promise, right? And then following up with, would they want to have, in our case, we call it a capabilities briefing. This is basically our capabilities, no pressure, right? We go into a little deeper dive in terms of what we're capable of, which is also what we're not capable of. We also want to make sure we're clear on that. And then really being able to stay top of mind and create the relationship. And, if there's no action taking, we certainly invite them if they want to continue to receive resources or strategies or tips. Again, no strings attached. We have a newsletter that we put out every 3 weeks. And it has very much forward with value. And then every, I don't know, maybe 3 cycles or so, we have a specific call to action, a program we have coming up, or an executive roundtable they can participate in, or a forum, right? Or some event, right, that we're holding, but very event-based. And that's just because that's something I just really enjoy doing. But having a process of follow-up. So many people have, a whole bunch of business cards or lists of names, or people who have actually said, yeah, I'm interested, and they haven't followed up. But guess what? There's no statute limitations on business cards in the top file drawer of your desk. So.
Okay. The problem is that you're giving so much golden nuggets, Christina, that I need to choose which ones I want to follow up on. So talk to me more about that non-sales pressure approach. The reason I want to dig into this is twofold. The first one is B2B coaches and consultants don't like to sell. That's not what they are good at. What they are good at is delivering excellent work on the very specific niche that they help solving problem in. And actually, they're not even used to sell, because the way their business starts is usually because their former employer or someone who referred them got them their first gig, and then it's developed into a bigger engagement, and then the people he or she was working with refer them to other people like them, and that's usually how you build your first client portfolio as a B2B coach or consultant. So you're not used to sell in the first place. At the same time, when you get into it, the question I want to ask you is, by being very, absolutely not putting any pressure, aren't you losing people on the fact that they just are too afraid to make a decision? So, analysis paralysis, and they just don't make a decision, although what you propose could actually help them. How do you navigate that very thin line between making sure you help the people that you can help with your paid services without putting too much sales pressure?
Well, in our conversation, so let's just say we have a capabilities conversation, just sharing capabilities, right? And in that we give examples, case studies, right? Kind of how we've helped clients in the past, what problems they've had, more so what results we've gotten. And you really have to look at people's interest, engage their interest level, right? And make it a conversation, not a sales pitch. But that's really important. And in doing so, just for intrapersonally, like, inside, really completely not being attached to the outcome, being genuinely curious when they bring up a problem or an issue, like, oh yeah, we've had that problem, or yeah, that just happened to us. Getting them to talk through and think out loud a bit, getting them to connect some dots once we share our capabilities, right? And then if we do go farther and we say, well, if they mention a problem that they're having, and of course, because if we have a capabilities conversation, we keep it to that 15, 20 minutes. Doesn't switch into a sales call, because every time we switch into a sales call, our tone changes, our nonverbal behavior changes. We feel this pressure, and now we switch hats. And if we're uncomfortable with sales, boy, that other person can really feel it. Then we start to emote some feelings, whether it's hesitancy or lack of confidence or competence, either one of those, and those can leak out very much so, and other people can pick up on those and kind of start to go, whoa, something just changed here. I don't know what that was. So we want to make sure that doesn't happen. And so we go into a deeper needs discovery conversation. We really kind of figure out, do they have a problem that is big enough, expensive enough, specific enough, relevant for to even solve right now, right? We just really come from a place of curiosity. And it's really, there's a lot more questions being asked, genuinely, not pressured questions where I want to lead you to push you to making a decision, and not to falsely create some sense of urgency, right? We have to be careful. That's very sales tactic like, right? We want to avoid that. This is relationship-based sales, right? Consultative based sales, where you're really creating a relationship and you're offering some solutions that are no strings attached, or maybe solutions that are right in front of them, that they can solve for themselves. So really genuine, it comes from a place of being very genuinely wanting to be helpful, right? And then also wanting to help them identify what is the specific problem, right? And oftentimes, it kind of the convergence between them getting very clear on the problem they have and very clear about the problems we solve. It's like two magnets coming closer and closer and closer together. The experience in these conversations is like they go, oh my gosh, when can you start? I mean, that's that's the difference in this, which is, well, let's see at the end of this conversation, let's see if and how I can help. And so we go through the needs discovery. We look at the cost of the problem, the real cost, the actual cost, the opportunity cost, and kind of all the problems that they share, that they start to open up and share, that they're having, all the resistance and the blockers and things like that. And then after we shared, our capabilities, then they realize, oh, this is a good fit. It also helps us decide whether or not it's a good fit for us to work with them. Just because somebody wants to work with us doesn't mean we feel like it's a good fit. Sometimes we get those folks, and I'll just call it the Excedrin factor, right? Is just way too high, or we know it's not a good fit and we can't help. In which case, we have to know when we can bow out. But that said, so I feel like it's then the timing is appropriate for us to describe, well, here are a couple of ways, a couple of thoughts I have about how we might work together, describing that, one or two options, giving them a range of investment, because at that point, I actually don't have enough. I might still not have enough information to put forth let's have an engagement conversation, which becomes yet another conversation. Or we could add it on to this one. But, like you said, it's a longer runway, but it's very much co-created solution. It's not, I'm going to go into my cone of silence and come up with a proposal that I'm going to float to you and hope that I heard everything, got everything right. So even our approach to the engagement is very collaborative. The engagement, by the time we're at a contract or engagement letter, we have already discussed everything. And I brought up all the objections they possibly could have, like too much stuff on our plate, I don't know if I have to get somebody else, some other decision maker involved. I brought up all the objections they haven't, and we talk through it right now rather than having a surprise later where we just really missed the boat. So.
Absolute sales masterclass. I like that a lot, Christina, which could almost deserve a whole episode on its own. Let's see about that. So one of the things that I learned when I was at PricewaterhouseCoopers from the partner who taught me everything was the following. He was like, Guillaume, there are two types of consultants. And I suspect this applies to B2B coaching as well. He was like, there are the hunters and there are the farmers. And he was like, I'm a hunter. I love the smell of fresh blood in the morning. I love to go after new business. But the partners growing the fastest, the ones bringing in the most money, are the farmers, the ones who are able to take that initial engagement and transform it into a multi-layered, multi-year projects involving other teams from PwC. This is where the money is. Mm-hmm. So whilst you clearly seem good at selling, how do you, once you get an engagement, once you start working with a founder, a team, how do you transform it into a, further bigger engagement and make sure that you farm the relationships, all whilst, of course, bringing value to the clients, right? This only works if they perceive the value and they want to spend more with you. So how do you do that?
Absolutely. Well, I've about 3/4 of the way through an engagement. And for us, typically we have our engagements start at 12 months, right? Just because of what kind of impact we make in helping a company on an annual basis, right? About 3/4 of the way through any engagement, whether it's a 12-month or 18-month or 24-month, 36-month engagement, about 3/4 of the way through that 12-month period, we have a strategy meeting with the client. Or the decision maker and makers, even if it's the whole entire team, but primarily it's probably CEO, CFO. It just depends on what our measurables are in terms of outcomes. So we are very outcome based. We do have measurable outcomes and deliverables. It's because we always want to measure return on investment as much as possible. So about 3/4 of the way through, we just check in and we say, so here's so far what we've accomplished, right? And here's also some things that we are either hearing, sensing, here's some challenges that have come up or we anticipate may come up in the near future, just to bring their attention to it. Because oftentimes, we're busy, our sleeves are rolled up, we're in the work. We really want to take time to celebrate and help them see how far they've come, right? And where we're at, whether we're on track, hopefully not on track and not off track. And then also see that way they can make the connection between the partnership they have with us, as well as the difference it's made, right? And they can celebrate that what they've done. And then sometimes in that, as with any growth opportunity, other opportunities or challenges arise as a company, right? As a company grows, right? And your clients, even if you've worked with them for years, don't assume they know what you do, because they may not, right? So at that 3/4 of the way juncture, so we celebrate wins. We, identify things that we're still working on. We also identify some things that have come up, right? And some low-hanging fruit, some quick wins they can do to, because we're outsiders still, right? And we can see things they oftentimes can't. So we want to just give them the opportunity to, to address challenges before they become dumpster fires. And then we also can seed, and if you would like our help with that, we'd be happy to have another conversation. That's another needs discovery meeting. That's not just scope creep that happens, because that can happen with professional service providers, but it's a clear scope of, next opportunity, next scope of work. So I think I would say probably about 65-70% of our business is with existing clients we have started out being a solution for X, and then now another opportunity, challenge, or problem has also come up as a result of their growth, which is a good thing. But we also either we can solve it directly, or we can bring somebody on the team to solve it that works under our umbrella. So it gives us an opportunity to scale our services as well.
So you've got it pretty well nailed to a T, Christina. Let me throw you a curveball then.
Okay.
Where do you find yourself the most stuck right now? The reason I'm asking you this is we will have B2B coaches and consultants listening to us or when the episode goes live that might be stuck at the same point. I think it's always interesting to hear from our peers how they are thinking about solving a problem that we are facing ourselves. So for you, what would that be?
I think for me, what I would say was I will also have a tendency to work in my business rather than be disciplined enough to continue to work on my business, right? And this, you can see this in the bank account, right? Everybody sees it seasonally. So we're working on the business, and we have, a nice stream of clients. We have some contracts that are waiting to be executed on, so our bank account goes like this, and then we start working, right? And if it's just us or a small team, right, we get buried in the work, and we lose track of that funnel. That funnel starts to empty, right? And then we get say to the end of a cycle or a 90-day period or 6-month period, 12-month period, and then we're like, oh, all our work is done. And if we haven't really been ahead of, having the bounce meeting, a bounce is when you have that 3/4 of the way meeting and you bounce from one opportunity into the next. We don't call them bounce meetings to our clients, but internally we refer to them as bounce meetings. So we don't have the bounce meetings, we're not working on the business. And if we don't consistently have we don't have a cadence of, well, like for me, it's speaking, like, have a goal of at least 2 large industry conferences a year. We have executive roundtables and executive forums. Those are more invitation only, very small roundtables that I facilitate conversations with my potential ideal clients. So if we're not doing those on a every 2-month basis or minimally once a quarter, if I'm not doing those things to prospect, you kind of disappear and you end up working in the business. So for me, that's my struggle, is to stay disciplined, and making sure that that my nose isn't to the grindstone with my clients. So much so, because our capacity is limited, right? We can only do that so much for so long before we're burnt out or we're not working both sides of the business. And so that's where I will typically get stuck. The other place I might get stuck is believing that I have to be the one to deliver the services. So recognizing that I do have access to a bench of people who can deliver the services. Either I don't want to, don't like to, I'm not the best at delivering. And some of our leadership development types of workshops for mid-level managers that we have offered in the past, it's like, I really have no desire to do those much. So I've got to make sure to not believe that I have to be the one to deliver those services. So what can I delegate or outsource to a team member? And so what that is that looks, how can I scale my business so I'm not the face of the business and I'm not the one who's doing all the, delivering of the services. So I think that's a trap. And that's something I struggle with myself, is letting go of doing those things. So
A lot of food for thoughts here. Thanks a lot for sharing this, Christina. What's the next big thing for you? What's the next big level for growth? So although it's great to dream, and I like to think about like 2, 3, 5 years from now, but in your business, with you personally, the next 3 to 6 months, what are you looking forward to implement so that you take your business to the next level?
We have a team alignment a program that I believe is very timely, and it really and needed right now. when it comes to executing strategy. So I'm super excited about launching that. We've had a soft launch, but not a hard launch till after the first of the year. We'll start moving it forward in December. But again, a lot of decisions, a lot of people go into some kind of holiday hibernation here in the US between Thanksgiving and Christmas. And decision makers just don't make decisions. Everybody's just kind of checked out when it comes to taking any action. So, now to the end of this month, and then I'm looking forward to working more on my business in the quieter times of the year, meaning less client service, fewer client services being delivered, and then launching in January, launching the team alignment programs. And what I'm also looking forward to, as I just mentioned, the opportunity to have my bench members, to identify some bench members who can deliver those services in that training. So I'm really excited about the timing of that, and then the opportunity for me to be able to do more strategy with the decision makers and less working in the business delivering the services.
On the business instead of in the business.
Well, and it gives me more time freedom because I have hobbies that require me to travel, and I really like to be able to step away from my business and still have it bringing in revenue. Right. So in the first 90 days is going to be the litmus test for that for me, because I do travel quite a bit the first 90 days of the month or the year.
Now, this is going to be an interesting period.
Yeah.
Christina Haxton, ladies and gentlemen. Christina, if people want to find out more about you or what you do, where should they go?
Absolutely. Our website is all one word. It's centerforsustainablestrategies.com. And that's our website. I'm also pretty active on LinkedIn. So I'd love anyone who wants to connect with me on LinkedIn through my personal page, or my individual page is Christina Haxton at LinkedIn. And then our LinkedIn company page is Center for Sustainable Strategies. Also can call or text 970 in the US, 1-970-279-1779, Christina at sustainable-leaders.com. And I'm happy to coordinate and collaborate with any other consultants or coaches out there. Again, I've got quite a bit of water under the bridge that I've learned the best practices and biggest mistakes. I'm happy to share those also.
All the links in the description. One thing I can say for sure, Christina, is that you've gained at least one connection out of this interview on LinkedIn. Me, just added you. And Thank you so much for coming on Consulting Leaders.
Oh, thank you so much, Guillaume. Thank you so much for asking, and I appreciate it.
It was a pleasure having you.
Thanks.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of the Consulting Leaders Podcast. We hope you learned valuable lessons on how to grow your practice and take your business to the next level. Make sure to subscribe and leave us a review wherever you're listening to this show so you never miss an episode. To apply and be a guest on the show, click the link in the description. See you next time. How was that?